pleasure as medicine and reclaim your birthright to more joy, more pleasure, and more satisfaction in every area of your life with Devi Ward.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sex is Medicine. I am so stoked to be here this evening and to have you joining us this evening. And I am so excited to share with you my guest this evening, Dr. Paul Tanari, who is just cutting edge in the field of sexual health and wellness for all of us human beings. And you may remember Dr. Tanari from previous shows. I had you on my show many, many years ago. So I'm so grateful to have you here sharing your brilliant wisdom with us once again.
Hello, Devi. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Yay, awesome. So before we dive in, you sent me a very long bio, and I really love it when my wonderful guests share about themselves rather than me just reading from a piece of paper. So could you give us a little introduction to who you are and your history and how you came to be in this field of sexual health and wellness?
Okay, so my background was originally in physics and engineering, and then when I graduated into a really bad recession, and so all my job offers were canceled, and so I was desperate to look for work because it's too late to apply to graduate school. So I saw there was a job in the Department of Epidemiology, and so I applied, and they really needed someone with a strong background in statistics. I'd also taken biology and biostatistics, so that was a good asset. So they started training me in advanced epidemiology. So I began to study about disease, about this disease transmission, about susceptibility to disease, and that got me interested in the whole health aspects of this. So I was able to use my physics background in statistics and in epidemiology, and they trained me right up to close to the PhD level in epidemiology. Now, what really got me going was the death of my partner. My partner died at age 39 of breast cancer. And from what I understood in breast cancer, she didn't have any of the risks. She wasn't a smoker. She exercised regularly. She had no family history. The only risk that she had that I could see was that she always wore these really tight underwire bras, and she'd even sleep in them, which I recommended her not to do, but she kept doing it. Anyway, so I began to say, well, maybe we should do some medical research on this. And so I found that the underwires press directly on the main lymph channels right under the crease of the breast where it touches the rib, right? And when you press on a soft pipe, the fluid can no longer flow. And so you get backup of fluid. And the purpose of lymph is to drain toxins out of the cells. The cells are all bathed within lymph fluid. Without it, we would be a potato chip, right? So everyone knows about the circulatory system, but very few people understand the function of the lymphatic system. It's probably 10 times more important than the circulatory system.
Wow.
And so it drains away toxins from the cell. It does many other things, but that's the main thing that it does. So if you block the flow of lymph, you can see what happens when you have elderly patients whose lymphatic system is shut down. They get elephant legs. Right? Yes. Well, that's the lymph backing up. Okay, so you can see what happens when you interfere with the flow of lymph, right? When I do lymphatic massage on a patient, they sometimes can lose a cup size. So that's the lymph that's been backed up by their tightly fitting bras, right? And that's not healthy. I mean, you might think that bigger breasts are better, but not when it's trapped lymphatic fluid. Okay? So I began to do a whole medical research on this, and then I actually wrote a book on it, which is what we're talking about today, Lymph Mobbed and Booby Trapped, where I look at the whole history of the lymphatic system, the whole history of female apparel. Traditionally, women wore very loose-fitting clothing. If you look at Roman fashion, Greek fashion, medieval fashion among the lower classes, lymphatic problems only began to arise in the Middle Ages when you had these really, really tight dresses and corsets and whatever that the upper classes were wearing, right? That's when problems in the lymphatic system first started to appear in the medical literature, right? Today, you see the same problems arising when people wear very tight-fitting clothing that doesn't allow the lymph to flow properly. Okay, so I wrote a whole book on this, and I developed a series of 10 exercises that women can easily do in the shower to open up.
I'm going to pause you there because we're going to circle back to that. Okay. So I just wanted to recap. So you became interested in sexual health and the flow of lymph from the death of your partner.
Yes.
And you've done a brilliant job over these last years that I've known you in talking about the importance of how the lymphatic system plays such a huge importance in female sexual health.
Exactly.
One of the things that my listeners are so interested to hear is the impact of the foreskin. How does male circumcision impact female sexual health?
Okay, before I answer that question, let me just say I was so interested in this that I actually ended up doing a PhD in the topic on biofluid mechanics. So the flow of fluids through very narrow channels, especially channels that are deformable. What happens when you crush a deformable channel? It's a very complex thing. The mathematics is incredibly complex. That's why I got a PhD doing it, right? It's called Coulette flow or capillary flow. And it's an area of intense study right now. And so I was able to analyze the whole flow through the thoracic area, the upper part of the body mathematically, and understand what happens when you distort the flow of fluid through that part of the body.
That's huge. I mean, that's massive because breast cancer is such a huge thing. My mother has been suffering from it for the last 6 years. I mean, it's huge. It's epidemic. I'd say it's epidemic. And so the research that you've done that talks about the constricting in that area of a woman's breast and the flow of lymphatic system and the detoxification of the lymphatic system, I think is really, really crucial for women. So
combining that with my research in epidemiology, combining the science of fluid mechanics with epidemiology, looking around the world, other factors being equal, of course, because there's many factors, canceling out smoking and diet and whatever things, other things being equal, the cancer rate around the world is directly proportional to the number of hours per year that a woman wears a tight-fitting bra.
So that is so fascinating, Dr. Paul. How come people are not, how come the medical community is not more cognizant of that? How come more people aren't aware of that?
Well, most MDs are not intimately familiar with epidemiology. They're good at what they do, but epidemiology is a separate area, right? Secondly, it's taken a sample size of millions of women around the world. But if you look at places like Africa and Asia where women never wear bras, breast cancer rates are very, very low. Okay, and of course, other things being equal, assuming non-smokers and, same type of diet and so on. You have to cancel out that. But places where women wear bras many, many hundreds of hours per year, you see escalating cancer rates directly proportional to the number of hours per year.
And see, it's so interesting because people poo-poo this. So I remember, not that I'm a big Gwyneth Paltrow fan, bless her heart, but on her website, Goop, she talked about what you're talking about. And she got crucified, quite literally, for suggesting that wearing underwire bras in some way contributed to breast cancer. So what you're saying is that you actually have the research that maps this out. So why that is actually a fact.
Let me stress it's one factor. For example, a high-fat diet, not nursing your children. There's other factors as well. So other factors being equal, this is a factor. Now, what's interesting, I'm gonna be probably crucified for saying this, but the cancer organizations like the Run for the Cure, the Canadian Cancer Association, the American Cancer Association, are not in the business of preventing cancer.
Right.
They are in the business of detection and treatment. Okay. Yes. So when I volunteered to donate my book to the Run for the Cure here in Canada, donate it to all the participants, they said that is not in our mandate.
Right. Well, that makes sense because at least in the United States, American medicine, it's not geared towards prevention, right? Preventative medicine. It's geared towards identifying symptoms and, destroying those symptoms, putting Band-Aids over symptoms. So preventative medicine, holistic medicine isn't really in the vocabulary of mainstream Western medicine or allopathic medicine.
Right. So what I talk about is prevention. I'm not in the business of detection and treatment. I leave that to the professional oncologists. I'm in the business of prevention.
Okay. So along those lines, how does female ejaculation, squirting, this, thing that people want to see in porn and women go to workshops to learn how to do, we think it's a fun, sexy trick. Some people are embarrassed by it. There's all this stuff about female ejaculation. What part does that play in female sexual health?
Okay, so let me just say that there's over 5,000 species of mammals on Earth, right? And out of all those species, they all have a foreskin. So that tells you there's something vital about that piece of anatomy, right?
They all have a foreskin. They all have a foreskin.
They all do, ranging from shrews, which is the smallest mammal, up to elephants. They all have a foreskin.
Look at that. And I bet we're the only species that cuts it off.
Yes, and not only that, I've seen these experiments done when I was in university where they would circumcise rats, and female rats in heat would refuse to mate with them.
Huh.
Because of the dramatic modification in the hormones and the mechanical action, whatever, the females would simply refuse, which is almost unheard of for a female rat in heat, because they'll mate with any rat, but not a circumcised rat. So I'm going to state something that's really powerful here. Homo sapien females are the only mammal that will have sex with a circumcised penis.
Well, thank God, because I mean, there would be a lot of unhappy people on this planet if that were the case. So I'm glad that we're still willing to have sex with a circumcised male. But I do agree with you in that we need to know a lot more about the actual function of the foreskin, not just for male sexual health. Because what I find so radical about your orientation to this is that a lot of the conversation about male circumcision is about their sexual pleasure, you know, and their health and wellness, which, you know, absolutely we should be, you know, holding that high. But the way you talk about it impacting female sexual health, particularly in regards to keeping us healthy, is revolutionary, in my opinion. So could you share how the male foreskin interacts with the vagina sexually to support our health?
Yeah. Before I answer that, I'm just going to say one quick answer here.
Okay.
The retiring head of a major business school, I believe it was MIT or Harvard Business School, the retiring head of the marketing division was asked in his retirement party, in your knowledge, what is the best marketing campaign that's ever been launched? And everyone expected him to say, oh, Procter & Gamble or, you know, Tide or something like that. But he said, no, the American circumcision industry has the best marketing campaign ever launched in history, because they convinced 100 million women to prefer the circumcised penis to the natural, healthy penis, right? And that's an incredible feat. Now, let me explain why that's incredible. Because, as I said, every mammal has a foreskin. It has a very, very specific function. Its function is to, first of all, limit the amount of friction that is applied to the inside of the vagina. So the vagina is a very delicate organ, as any woman can tell you, very delicate tissue, very easily irritated.
Very true. I will say, because I'm going to pause you, they're very delicate. We push babies out of vaginas. So, I mean, they can take a hit, take a hit, right? But as far as being subject to irritation and infections and imbalances, absolutely.
Yeah. So everyone knows, every doctor will agree with me that dry mouth is a very serious medical condition. You can actually lose your teeth if your saliva glands fail. It's a very serious condition. Any woman will tell you, especially postmenopausal women, dry vagina is a very serious condition. It's incredibly painful. As any woman will tell you, suffered from that condition, and it requires immediate treatment because it's so painful, right? And yet, Americans have been convinced that dry penis is a healthy condition. But I contend that dry penis is just as serious as dry mouth or dry vagina, because the penis is not an external organ. It is a mucosa, moist, gentle, covered organ that is only exposed during sex, and it's meant to be compatible with another mucosa, the mucosa of the vagina. Right? So that's the first thing, the mechanical lubrication that occurs from the well-lubricated intact penis, right? And so what's really interesting is when I've studied intact men, when the foreskin retracts, the entire penis becomes mucous membrane.
Yes.
From the tip right to the base, because the foreskin retracts right to the base. So the entire shaft of the penis is mucosa, is mucous membrane, well lubricated, designed to be compatible with the vagina. So let me also state that from a biological point of view, there's two types of bacteria. There's those that live on your skin, right, which are meant to be skin bacteria. And there's those that live in your mouth and your vagina. They're mucous membrane bacteria. They are incompatible with each other. They are completely different ecosystems. Okay. One of the characteristics of mucosa bacteria is they produce hydrogen peroxide, which everyone knows is a disinfectant, right? Doesn't keep things healthy, right? Well, the bacteria in your mouth produce hydrogen peroxide. That's part of their life thing. So they keep, that's why when you cut your tongue or something, it heals so quickly.
Oh, interesting. Because I thought hydrogen peroxide wasn't good to put on a wound.
Well, yes, it is, because it produces oxygen, which helps clean the wound and disinfect the wound. That's why hydrogen peroxide is quite good for wounds. So it keeps mucosa healthy. So the penis is an internal organ covered with mucosa bacteria, which are self-cleaning. Now, when you remove the foreskin, you change the penis from an internal organ to an external one, now exposed to the skin, to the air, right? And now it becomes just like your arm or your leg, covered in external bacteria. These are incompatible with the vagina. So every time you have sex with a circumcised penis, you're getting incompatible bacteria being pushed deep into your vagina. Right?
Well, sorry, go on.
Yeah. So the consequences of this is that American women have some of the highest rates of yeast infections and UTIs. Right? Now,
and we're wondering and we wonder why, right? I mean, I've spoken with so many women, and it's like every time they have sex with their partner, they get a UTI, and they're wondering why. They think they're broken, right?
But from the point of view of the circumcision industry, this is desirable because you're now selling things like Canestin and all these yeast medicines, right, which are profitable. The healthy vagina is not profitable.
Oh, the healthy human's not profitable.
That's right.
Right,
exactly.
in general. And I will say, to support this, so again, like the research that I did on foreskin and circumcision, the compatible bacteria is absolutely huge. And I will say, when I have had the pleasure and the opportunity in my life to have sex with an intact man, and we were in a relationship where we were not needing to use condoms or barrier methods at that time, my vagina smelled completely different.
That's right.
Completely different smell, completely different just sensation and interaction. So yeah, my personal life experience supports your thesis, your hypothesis.
And my personal life experience supports it as well, because I lived the first part of my life as an intact man, the middle part as a circumcised man, not through my choice, and then the last part of my life, right up to now, as an intact man again. So I can compare both. I'm one of the few men that can compare both. Right. And we'll talk about that. Now I'm going to get to answering the question, the function of the foreskin, right? The foreskin one is lubricating qualities, right? The head of the penis produces a substance called smegma, which the circumcision industry calls as a filthy, disgusting, cheesy substance. But actually, it's lubricating qualities, it has biological qualities. It's antibiotic, antiviral, antifungal qualities. You take away the smegma, you take away those healing properties. Right. Now, of course, if you never wash your penis, it's going to accumulate and it will smell. That's true. Same thing. But women produce smegma as well in their clitoral hood. And of course, if you never wash your clitoris, you're going to have the same problem. Right. But no one talks about circumcising women for cleanliness. Right.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And I actually, I'm just going to interject here. I actually had somebody on social media today who said that an intact penis is more likely to spread disease.
Rubbish.
Yeah. That was my thought as well. That's like saying that we need to cut off our inner labia in order to prevent the spread of disease.
Complete rubbish. Now, the evidence for this is the largest sample size ever accumulated in history. 100 million circumcised men in the United States. What is the consequence of that? The United States has the highest rate of STDs and HIV in the Western world. Wow. Did I say more?
So use condoms, people. Use condoms and keep your foreskin.
Yes.
So, okay, so the function of the foreskin, it's compatible bacteria. It has all these antibodies and antiviral things that are naturally produced because nature wants us to be happy and healthy. That's the way we were designed. So what else? How else does the foreskin function to support my health?
Well, there's also glands, which have been poorly studied in the foreskin, which secrete a hormone which actually helps trigger ovulation in women.
That's amazing.
Right?
God is brilliant.
Yeah.
That is brilliant. We're brilliant.
Among this and among other reasons, this may be the reason why there's record rates of infertility in the United States. So many problems with reproductive problems because the highest concentration of circumcised men in the Western world, right? So anyway, let's get back to more functions of the foreskin. When the foreskin retracts, it forms a bulge around the head of the penis, which presses directly on the G-spot, right? Circumcised men can't do this, but it presses a pressure because the G-spot does not respond to friction, which is the only thing that a circumcised penis can provide is friction. It responds to alternating pressure, which the foreskin can provide. So this alternating pressure is what triggers a G-spot response, a G-spot orgasm. Now, this is not just a luxury that's nice to have, it's vital for female health because G-spot response allows a purging response that allows you to cleanse toxins out of your body. So a well-trained woman can expel up to 2 liters, which is like half a gallon of fluid through G-spot ejaculation, through the Skene's glands.
Okay, so why is that important? Because again, doing lots of research about female ejaculation, the latest study that I read was from 2015, and Beverly Whipple, you know, one of the sheroes of sexology and sexual research, they studied 7 women in the laboratory and they determined that it was urine, or it was urine mixed with prostate-specific antigens. And the conversation around female ejaculation is that it's only the white milky stuff, that's only like a teaspoon that's actually ejaculate. All the squirty fluid is actually pee coming from your bladder. So there's all kinds of studies that have been done, but then also other researchers that I've relied upon. Deborah Sundahl, who has this book, fabulous book for those of you who are watching and wanting to learn more, the G-spot, one of the premier books about that. And then of course, Sherry Winston's book, Women's Anatomy of Arousal, another fabulous book about the female sexual anatomy and how we work. It's good to know how to drive our car. But they also talk about the fluid, the copious amounts of fluid coming from the Skene's glands, right? So they also speak about how it's not pee, that it's actually these just copious amounts of fluid that are being pulled from the body into the Skene's glands and then ejaculated out of the urethra. So the question is always, what is that fluid? Where does it come from? What is it?
Okay, yeah, Davey, let me just state that the biggest problem in research, and there's many problems see, one of the jobs that I do is I look at scientific research and I analyze it to see if it's valid. That's one of the jobs of an epidemiologist, is to analyze research and say, well, this is rubbish or this is good, right? That's been my job, to analyze research. So I look at this research and a sample size of 7 is far too small.
I know, I thought so too. I'm like, that's
small
ridiculous.
Sample size, right?
Yeah.
So it may have been urine in that case. But I've worked with thousands of women over the last 35 years, thousands of women. I mean, I've talked to women who have valid sample size, in other words, prostitutes and escorts, right? And talk to them because they have a sample size of thousands of men, right? That's their profession. Right? And so that's where all my data comes from large sample sizes. Remember, it took 50 years to prove that smoking causes cancer with millions of cases. So a sample size of 7 is useless.
Yeah, I would agree. That was one of my issues with that study too. I'm like, you can't say that 7 women is conclusive for every woman on this planet. No.
Okay, so my research, I always had the women empty their bladder immediately before we did the test. Okay, so we knew that their bladder was empty. Right now, it can be misleading because the Skene's glands empty into the end of the urethra, so it looks like it is coming from the urethra, but it's not coming from the bladder, right? Now, even if it was coming from the bladder, there's no way that the bladder could expel 2 liters of fluid. No, 2 liters of fluid is massive, right? Right? And there's only one place that much fluid can come from, and that's from the lymphatic system.
Well, and I would say that in my experience, when I was doing a lot of the squirting, it's not like it was just like one squirt. It was like, we're talking over like 2 or 3 hours, like gush after gush after gush after gush. So it's not like, you know, like I do a bunch, squirt out a cup of water, and then like 10 minutes later, another cup. So I know my bladder didn't refill in that 10-minute period of time. Yeah.
The only possible source of that much fluid is your lymphatic system, right? Because, you know, we're 98% water, right? And so much of that water is in the lymph system. And so that's where it's coming from. The Skene's glands have a direct tap into the lymphatic system.
Okay,
And
how? Tell me how that works.
Well, there's very fine capillary tubes that connect to the lymphatic system and into the Skene's glands. And the whole female apparatus is designed for purging. And the foreskin was designed to trigger this response. Okay, now how powerful is this response? Well, according to the book Sex as Nature Intended, studies they've shown that it's 10 times more likely for a woman to have an orgasm, either clitoral or G-spot, during intercourse with an intact man than a circumcised man.
Okay, wait, say that again. Guys, you have to listen to this. Mothers, if you have your daughters and you care, mothers, if you have sons and you care about their future wives, listen to this. So say that again.
Okay, we're not talking about oral sex or vibrators or anything. We're talking about pure intercourse.
Penis and vagina, heterosexual intercourse.
Vagina, nothing else, just intercourse. A woman is 10 times more likely to have an orgasm with an intact man than a circumcised man. Now, that is a lot of health consequences. There's studies been done in Europe where they looked at orgasmic capacity in women and the effect on health. And they found over many, many years of study that women who had the most orgasms had the greatest life expectancy, the best health outcomes, the healthiest attitudes toward life, right? And other things being equal, the women who never orgasmed actually had shorter life expectancy and less optimal health outcomes.
Absolutely.
So orgasm's not just a luxury, it's for female health. Right?
It's for human health. Or sexual pleasure is healthy, and orgasm particularly.
It's also important for reproduction because camera studies have shown that when a woman orgasms, her cervix dips into the seminal pool and sucks up the sperm, right? So you have much more chance of being impregnated when you have an orgasm than not. Now, remember, all this is statistical.
Okay.
Right? So some women will have an orgasm with a circumcised man, no problem, right? But many women will not. Okay, so this is statistical. I'm just saying you are more likely to have an orgasm with a circumcised man than not.
So this is huge because there's so much conversation about the orgasm gap between women and men, and like so many theories on why it's so, and it's the position of the clitoris in relationship to the vaginal opening and yada, yada, yada. And what you're saying is that part of that issue for the orgasm gap is the actual removal of the foreskin.
Exactly, and this was known 1,000 years ago. There's doctors from the Middle Ages who noticed that women who were with circumcised men, which in those days were Jewish men, had less orgasms, fewer orgasms than having sex with an intact man. This was known 1,000 years ago.
Wow. Wow. And so it affects our health because we're having orgasms. Now, what about the ejaculation? Why is it so important for me as a woman to be able to squirt, to have this fluid release from my urethra?
Okay, before I answer that question, there's an important point to be made here, is that people know that if they want to be good at tennis, if you want to be Serena Williams, you've got to practice, right? Serena Williams serves 1,000 balls a day. And yet women expect to be experts in sex without ever practicing it, without ever training, right? I disagree. If you want to be good at sex, you do have to do some training, right?
Amen,
so
brother.
I do sex therapy, and I've worked with many women. So here's very quickly a case study. I worked with a 62-year-old woman who had never had an orgasm with her husband ever, and she needed an hour with a vibrator to have an orgasm. Sometimes she would throw it away in disgust. I gave her exercises to do tantric exercises, and within 1 year, she was able to have 3 orgasms a minute with her boyfriend.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah. And you know what? Every woman can do that. I've had 100% success rate. So 30% of women never have an orgasm in their lifetime. It's just because they haven't trained.
Yeah. Well, and I would say there's other causative factors in there too, because I work a lot in healing trauma and that sort of thing. So you have to get to the point where you're willing and interested in doing the exercises. And there's some kind of roadblocks that can be set up because of our life experiences.
That is true.
Once we get through the roadblocks, then we can start cultivating.
Yeah, you have to want to.
Cultivating.
You have to want to.
Well, yeah, exactly. So like I say, first there's clearing and then there's cultivating. So when we're in the position to begin cultivating our sexuality, you have exercises that you recommend. But let's circle back to why is it so important for us to be squirting?
Okay, so this is a capacity which only women have. Men can ejaculate, but the volumes are very low. Women have this capacity to purge huge amounts of lymph from their bodies. Now, as we know, water that stagnates, that doesn't flow, goes bad and it becomes undrinkable, right? The lymph wants to flow continuously. That's why exercise is so good, right? So the more you ejaculate, the more you're getting new lymph to flow throughout your body, the more toxins you're removing from your body, right? So I've specialized in helping people recover from trauma. So I've worked with women who've had incredible trauma, like gang rape and things like this, horrible experiences, right? And they've carried the trauma in their soft tissues, like lower abdomen is a common location, shoulders, another area, right? And so the first step is deep transverse therapy to remove the toxins from the soft tissue. The second step is to teach them how to have G-spot response, to purge these toxins out of their body, right? And I've had a lot of success at removing this trauma that imprints on soft tissues. Psychiatrists can deal with the mental trauma, but the other half of the trauma is imprinted on the soft tissues. That has to be dealt with massage and G-spot response training.
Yeah, somatic healing methods, right? So it lives in the body. The issues are in the tissues, as they say.
Issues in the tissue. I love that. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. So our ability to have these, fluid orgasms is what I'll call them. Fluid orgasms is our body's way of purging not only physical toxins, but it also sounds like emotional toxins as well.
Yes. And I've observed many of the women I interviewed said that during their teen years, when they started to become sexually active, they would actually have their first G-spot response and they would ejaculate on their boyfriend. And the usual response was, "Oh, you peed on me. That's disgusting." Right? And so the woman would clamp up and shut down that system. And so for the rest of her life, she'd, "Oh no, I can't pee on him, can't pee on him." But it's not pee.
Yes. Yes. And even if it is, so what? So I had a very similar experience when I was in my mid to late 20s, where I was with a partner and I would frequently ejaculate on him. And I had no idea what it was. I was so ignorant. And he would scream at me and call me all kinds of horrible names. Yeah. And I stopped having any kind of orgasm. And again, it was not an intellectual or conscious choice. It was just, I had been so shamed. I just knew, like, I inherently or instinctively knew that anytime I reached a certain peak of pleasure, that if I let go into that pleasurable sensation, that I would get screamed at or shamed afterwards. So I did not have another orgasm for the next 10 years until I started practicing Tantra. I did not have another vaginal orgasm for the next 10 years. Well,
I would submit to you that that's a form of incredible ignorance on the part of the man, right? And I can't really blame him because he was ignorant, right? But it's also a form of assault because it's assaulting your natural responses, trying to shut you down. There's still the fear of the huge sexual capacity that women have, right? Society has been against it, trying to shut it down, right? That's what the witch burnings were about, the fear of female sexuality, the fear of femininity, right? I'm trying to help women rediscover what is their birthright, right? Yes. Like this 62-year-old woman able to have 3 orgasms a minute, that is healthy, that is normal, that is great.
That is our capacity. And I have theories about why the patriarchy or males are afraid of the fullness of female sexual expression. And part of that has to do with the inability to retain their semen and last as long as they want to. So that's my theory on that fear.
I also teach men how to do tantric exercises. And as a result of training, men can orgasm without ejaculating.
So hey, my husband is a master at that. Exactly. Absolutely. That's what I teach too.
Exactly. So a man can have as many orgasms as he wants, as long as he wants, for hours. Right?
And that's so. And so you put the two together, right? You put the foreskin. Anyway. Right. So here's a big question. Another question that came in on social media is, and this is something that you went through for yourself, because as we're talking about, these millions of men have been circumcised, and it's infant circumcision, so they have no choice. It's non-consensual. It's a complete violation of their bodily autonomy. And so what do they do when they're in their 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s and they're like, I want my foreskin? So
let me answer that question. First step, before I answer it though, let me state the following. That is, I've seen parents be incredibly defensive and saying, we have the right to make this decision for our child. Well, first of all, that's bullshit because they cannot make any decisions about their female child. If they think their female child's labia is too long, they don't have the right to cut it off. They don't have the right to even remove their clitoral hood if they don't like it, right? The only healthy body part which parents are allowed to remove is the foreskin. There's no other body part. So there is no decision. It is an artificial decision which the circumcision industry has said that parents have, which they don't. Now, even assuming they do have the right, which to make that decision, which they don't, they do not have the right to impose their decision on every subsequent sexual partner that man is going to have, because you didn't give consent to be penetrated by a circumcised penis, right? And yet the boy's parents made that decision for you. Yeah. And I think this should be a Me Too issue, that if I was a woman, I would consider it a form of assault to force a man to make love with a circumcised penis, even if it doesn't want to.
Well, I love all penises, so I'm not going to say that, but I do agree that it should be a Me Too, but in relationship to the trauma and violence that's perpetuated against men as well as women. And right. I firmly believe that infant male circumcision is violence. It's absolutely. So for those men who have had that experience and would like to have foreskin again, how do they do it?
Well, what I did is I sued the government of Canada, right? Because the place where I was circumcised was under the supervision of the government, right? And I said, you had no right to do this. My parents didn't give consent, right? And so I got a successful, I was able to get a free foreskin restoration surgery paid for by Medicare, which we have in Canada here, right? And so every Canadian man has the right to have free restoration surgery because
okay, Canadian men, this is good to know because I'm married to a Canadian. So Canadian men have the right to free foreskin restoration surgery. So what is your experience? So there's surgical options, and I want to talk about those, but then I want to talk about the non-surgical options too, because poor American men, they don't have that option. Okay. So for the actual surgical option, what has been your experience?
Okay, my experience, before we talk about what the options are for American men, my experience was that before, no partner I was with ever had an orgasm just from intercourse alone, right? Always had to do oral or fingers or whatever, vibrator, additional stimulation, right? As soon as my foreskin was restored, this really surprised me that my partner started to have orgasm just from intercourse. And also my partner started to have powerful G-spot response. And so I noticed it was like night and day, the difference, right? Plus, I had a very, very tight circumcision, which is why I wasn't able to do manual foreskin restoration. And unfortunately, the way circumcision is performed in the United States leaves very little foreskin to restore. And that's deliberate because they don't want men to discover what it's like to have a foreskin. So they make it almost impossible to restore it. So, but once my foreskin was restored, I used to have pain because the skin in my penis was so tightly stretched when I had an erection that I was in pain. But I thought that was normal. I didn't know anything else, right? But once I had my foreskin restored, the pain was gone. And then I discovered the full pleasure and joy of normal intercourse. It was wonderful. And plus so my partners didn't get a sore vagina anymore.
So did you noticed a difference in sensation? Because that's a big question. Because when you're cutting away the foreskin, you're cutting all those precious nerve endings. Like, do they come back? I mean,
no, you're cutting away the most sensitive part of the body. Now let's talk a bit of biology here. The nerves in the head of the penis and the nerves in the foreskin are quite different. They have different functions, right? Everyone thinks they're all lumped together, right? No, they have completely different functions. The nerves in the head of the penis, their function is to trigger orgasm. That's their only function, right? The nerves in the foreskin are designed to give the deep, sustained sensation that comes from prolonged intercourse. Right? So what happens when you take away the foreskin? You leave only the nerves that are designed to trigger orgasm. So circumcised men, and I can speak from experience in this, are always fighting the desire to ejaculate.
Exactly.
So they're always fighting their own biology, right? So sex is not pleasurable for them because they, oh no, I don't want to come too soon. I don't want to come too soon. They're always thinking that, oh no, you know? And so young circumcised men suffer the highest rate of premature ejaculation in the world is in the United States. Right? Yep. It's almost unknown in Europe, right? Now, what happens in older circumcised men is you have the head of the penis, which wasn't meant to be exposed to the air, not meant to be exposed to underwear and clothing, right? It begins to calcify. It's called keratinization. So gradually more and more layers of protective skin accumulates on the head of the penis. So what happens, ironically, in older circumcised men is they can't ejaculate because their penis is so desensitized. As one man said, my penis feels like a rubber glove. I feel nothing. Right? Yeah. So they're working like crazy. They're treating you like an oil well. And many, many women I've interviewed saying, I feel like an object. He's pounding away at me. And he's not even aware of me. He's just trying to orgasm. Pound, 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 pound. Will I be able to orgasm, right? So you see two different problems. Premature ejaculation in the younger men, inability to ejaculate in the older men, neither of which are satisfactory for women.
Yes. So when you had your restoration, so did your sensation come back? Like what happens with that process?
Okay, once my foreskin was restored and the head of the penis was no longer, now I was a marathon runner, right? So you can imagine the abuse the head of my penis had, salt burns. So regularly after a marathon, I would take my shorts off and squeeze the blood out because the head of my penis was so raw, it was bleeding. That is not normal. And this is common in the locker rooms after a marathon. Circumcised men, their penis is stripped raw. The foreskin was designed to prevent that. Okay? Yeah. Now, once I was restored, then layers of calcified skin began to peel off the head of my penis because it was no longer needed until finally I had the very delicate mucosa back again. And the result of that is that, speaking as a man who's experienced both circumcised and intact, the intensity of my orgasms, and this is not an exaggeration, improved probably by a factor of 10.
Wow. And your partners were orgasming with you.
Yeah, I never knew that orgasms that powerful were possible, but that's what intact men feel.
Wow. Okay, so that's for Canadian men. Put out the alert, Canadian men, if you want your foreskin. Who do we petition? Do we have to like write to the Ministry of Sexual Health, or who do we talk to?
Okay, there's a strategy for doing it. What you do, you have to go to a psychiatrist and you say, I was psychologically harmed by this circumcision. I did not ask for it. It was not, it was done without my permission. And I feel I was psychologically harmed by this. You get a letter from your psychiatrist, then you go to a doctor and you say, I want a referral to a surgeon to have my foreskin restored, all paid for by Medicare.
Okay, all right, check that box, that's happening. So then for our American brothers and sisters, what is the process for that?
Okay, so if you were given what I call a mild circumcision, so you have some foreskin left, you can now go online and buy a number of foreskin stretching devices.
Okay.
Mechanically stretch foreskin. Now, foreskin is unique in the body. When it's put under tension, the cells start dividing, and then you will restore a completely normal foreskin again. Completely and blood vessels and everything.
Wow. Okay. So usually if it's not too tight of a circumcision, there is vestiges of it. I remember seeing that on some of my male partners, like there's a little bit of skin. So what you're saying is that if they put pressure and force on it, that it will regenerate itself.
Yeah. If you go online and do foreskin restoration, you'll find a number of mechanical devices which have been invented, which work very, very well. Okay? Now, if you've had a very tight circumcision, in other words, the way you can tell is that when you have an erection, the skin in the shaft is like a bowstring, really, really tight. Yeah. There's no play in it. Matter of fact, many men don't even have enough skin to have an erection. So as a result, they have a bent penis.
I've encountered that before.
Bent penis is caused uniquely by circumcision, right? And probably 30% of American men suffer from bent penis caused by circumcision. It's one of the undesirable side effects that they never talk about.
Wow.
I've known some men whose penis was so badly bent they couldn't have intercourse.
Wow. That's just blowing my mind right now, because I've had clients who have suffered from this issue, and I had no idea that it was related to circumcision. Yeah. So circumcision is like the cause of so many sexual dysfunctions for both men and women. 36% of men have complications from circumcision, which are never discussed. Now, the ultimate complication is death. There's about 1 to 2 deaths every day from circumcision. These are healthy children who were born healthy who die from circumcision. Wow.
Now, if this was women who were dying, something would be done immediately. But because it's boys, it's considered that's normal side effects of the surgery. It's incredible as a nation that we tolerate that. Now, you remember the magazine Playgirl?
Yeah. Mhm.
Well, I bought a copy many years ago, and I started to leaf through and looked at the penises objectively of the men, and the vast majority of them were circumcised, right? But probably 30 to 40% of them had damage to their penis. In other words, skin bridges, improperly healed foreskin, all types of damage to their penis. And yet these men were considered, the elite of the fleet species, and yet their penis was seriously damaged by circumcision, right? But you see, the way the industry propagates itself is through ignorance and silence, right? They don't talk about these issues, so people are ignorant of them.
Well, yeah, and even just the idea that foreskin is in some way unhealthy and that it spreads disease, like that fallacy right there. I mean, what spreads disease is having unprotected sex and not getting tested and that sort of thing.
Yeah, wear a condom, right?
Yeah, exactly. Wear a condom, foreskin or no foreskin, wear a condom.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard incredible lies that the American medical groups talk about. For example, I've heard a doctor say, circumcision is like a vaccine against HIV.
Yeah.
Rubbish.
Exactly.
Complete rubbish.
Yeah.
That's why the United States is the highest HIV rate in the Western world, right? Yeah. Or the foreskin is pathological. In other words, it's a disease that has to be cured. Rubbish.
Mm-hmm. So in your opinion, what is the best antidote? Because you're correct. Like, so many people are just uneducated about it. Like, I had no idea until I started doing research. My poor mom, when I told her about this, she cried because she had my brother circumcised. It's like, what is the antidote to this issue of such widespread circumcision and this mutilation of infant boys?
Okay, well, let me just say that no social movement can occur unless it taps into a residual belief or residual situation. So Americans have been contaminated by the Puritan ethic. Yeah. The Puritans have infected all aspects of the United States. This is why Janet Jackson exposing having a wardrobe failure was even an issue. In Europe, that would not even have been anything, right?
Not even registered,
it
right?
Made the national news. Come on, exposing a breast for a tenth of a second? Come on. Anyway, so I believe that this Puritan ethic is the source of all the problems. Yeah. So you have Dr. Kellogg, who began circumcision in the late 1800s, right? And he tapped into the Victorian hatred of sex, fear of sex, right? And he started to say, if you circumcise your boys and your girls, by the way, you will stop masturbation. Masturbation was seen as the great evil. Now, in 1922, they stopped female circumcision and all other interference with female genitals, fortunately, but they kept on the male circumcision because it was so profitable.
Yeah. Okay.
And as time went on, they kept inventing new reasons to do it. So at first it was preventing masturbation. When that became ridiculous, it prevented tuberculosis. During the 1950s, it prevented polio. Right? During these 1960s, prevent STDs. During the 1980s, prevent HIV. Right? See how they keep inventing new and it's all rubbish.
Yeah.
Okay? Because a doctor can easily make $250,000 a year from circumcisions. People don't realize that each foreskin is worth $100,000 in medical products.
So we need to have this conversation more. I could talk to you all day. This is lights me up. For those of you who haven't noticed, I get very excited and passionate about this, but we are out of time for tonight. So would you be willing to share with people how they can learn more about you and get their hands on your book? Because I read your book in both parts and it's very, very informative for people who want to know more about taking care of their lymphatic system.
Yeah. Okay. So my book is called Lymph Mobbed. L-Y-M, lymph, L-Y, I'm not good at spelling, lymph,
L-Y-M-P-H.
That's right. Lymph mobbed and booby trapped, right? And it talks about the exercises women can do to reduce their risk of cancer, right? Very quick, very easy to do in the shower, right? It gives you wardrobe options to underwire bras to be healthier, right? So it's not going to guarantee you won't get cancer, but it will greatly reduce your risk. Then the second part of the book talks about how you can initiate the exercises you can do to get G-spot response and some of the health benefits to that. Okay?
And so where can they find that? Where can they find those books?
Just go to Amazon and you enter either my name, Dr. Paul Tinari, Tinari. I know how to spell that. And or you enter Lymph Mobbed and Booby Trapped, and you could just buy the book, buy there in any type version you want. You can get it shipped
Beautiful.
to you as a
And
physical book or download the ebook.
Excellent. And you have a website too. Is that drtanari.com?
drtanari.com describes many of the work I've done over the years in many areas.
Fabulous. Well, let's have you back. I love talking with you. Thank you, everyone who joined us this evening. I hope it has enriched your mind and your spirit and your heart. You can catch me the first Thursday of every month with another fabulous, amazing guest on Sex is Medicine. And you can stay connected with me between shows at authentictantra.com. Check us out on Instagram, Facebook. We have lots of beautiful pictures for you to look at, lots of wonderful, inspiring quotes. So y'all have a beautiful evening. Thank you so much for joining us and much love. Have a beautiful month.
Thank you, Devi.